Welcome, standing room only, and Happy New Year to you. We normally have a time limit for public questions and members' questions and all this sort of palaver, but given the extraordinary nature of what we're discussing tonight, I'll allow all the questions. If you're not the person who has put the question in and you're standing in for somebody else, then there will be no supplementary questions. So, everybody happy about that? Good. I think we're still having technical problems, but never mind. Apologies. Stuart, anything else? No? Any declarations of interest? No. Okay. Do you want me to just do that? I think that's better. Oh, you can't hear me now. Probably good at that. All right, that's smashing. Thank you.
On what circumstances we would have an interest? I couldn't see anything in here that I would have an interest in, but could you just clarify?
Land and buildings other than your own home, which is are any of the sites being discussed? No? Anybody? Nope.
Excuse me. John, I have my house and the house next door, and I've already discussed this with the monitoring officer, and I don't need to declare an interest.
Right. Public question time. Minutes from the last meeting. No, there aren't.
There aren't any.
Thank you. Right. Public question time. Dennis Goodlad, please.
Good evening. Can everyone hear that? Is that okay? I want to understand the decision-making process leading to the proposal for 250 houses to be built at Winnersh Farms. The documentation for tonight's meeting states very clearly that these sites have been discussed with and are preferred, and I emphasise, and are preferred by the relevant town and parish councils. Now, the parish councillors at Winnersh, 3 of whom are also members of this council, are adamant that they have not discussed or recommended this particular site. Indeed, as recently as February last year, Winnersh Parish Council submitted a comprehensive list of objections to the last planning application submitted for that site, and I'll leave this for the meeting. This is patently a substantial disconnect in the process. My question is, who around this table made this decision to include Winnersh Farm in this list of sites in the local plan? Who made that decision, and why was that decision made after all the previous applications had been refused for significant and very valid non-compliance with planning policies?
Thank you, Mr. Goodlad, for your question. Talk about it. Oh. Sorry about this. I accept that the parish... Is that working? Is it?
It's fine.
Sorry. I accept that the parish council did not support the residential development at Winnersh Farm in our discussions with them in November 2017. The reasons put forward included flooding, access and noise. The proposed allocation now includes a wider area than what was discussed with the parish council. The wider area presents an opportunity to provide a well-designed development which addresses the issues of access and does not require the building on that area that floods. We also are confident that the issues of noise can be suitably addressed. With part of the wider area being owned by the council, the site is an opportunity to deliver increased numbers of affordable homes to support those who cannot access suitable housing elsewhere. In terms of process, all the proposed allocations in the recommended draft plan were discussed and agreed by a cross-party planning and transport member working group. The recommended consultation provides an opportunity for residents and others to let us know whether they agree or disagree with our proposals.
Your supplementary.
I agree with you, yes. Much has been said to take back control, if you'll excuse my use of that phrase. It wants to take back control of the planning process from developers and from endless appeal processes. And that's quite right too, I totally agree with that. However, it seems that that ethos does not apply to Winnersh. In Winnersh, it seems, developers hold sway. Developers such as Taylor Wimpey, for instance, seem to call the shots. The council have not followed their own procedures as laid out in the documentation provided. I ask tonight that the council reject this flawed plan and commission an independent external investigation into the probity of this decision to build 250 houses at Winnersh Farm.
As I said, you will have an opportunity through the consultation process. This tonight is only to take us to agreement to go to the consultation process. And through that process, you, along with ward members, along with all parish councils, will have the opportunity to feed all that information back to us.
That's the list of objectives. That's the problem.
Good evening. Hello, good evening. Make a change being on this side. Anyway, Woking Borough Council's track record of winning planning appeals in Shinfield South is very poor, to say the least, and has resulted in the 2010 local plan number of 2,500 houses increasing to over 4,000. How do you propose to protect sites owned by the University of Reading and others within Spencer's Wood and Shinfield from being approved for development at future planning appeals?
Good evening, Anthony. There is no hiding that changes to the government planning policy have unnecessarily and unacceptably undermined our local planning decision making. We continue to put considerable resources into defending our decisions, and I'm glad to say that we have won the majority of appeals involving developers in unplanned locations over the last few years. In November, this council approved a £630,000 fighting fund to help defend our decisions against speculative developers. For the current public inquiry at Cutbush Lane in Shinfield, we have employed Neil Cameron, QC, one of the country's top barristers, to present our case. As you know, the main defence against unplanned developers is put in place is to have a local plan which ensures that the planning policies continue to be effective and demonstrate that we meet our planning development needs. The recommended draft plan consultation is a vital step to achieving this. Without effective planning policies, there will be no real control or influence over the new housing and what type of housing development that takes place. This is because our position to defend appeals becomes untenable.
I think I'll find something. Your answer reminds me of when I sat where you are today in approving the 2010 local plan. And I approved it on the basis that there was a limit in my ward to 2,500 houses. The system has not delivered. And I am concerned, what guarantee does the residents of my area where I live, and also where all of you live, where is the defence from government and from yourselves for residents? Because as I said in my question, the track record, and I dispute I don't see the winning 50% in Shinfield for sure. The track record and government policy leads me to be concerned, and you know this because I've said it to all of you, that we will end up with Graiseley plus 10,000 houses because you've allowed Graiseley to go ahead, so they'll say, tick the box, thank you very much. And the other developers and landowners in Twyford or in Arborfield or in Barkham will make good arguments at the public inquiry, and the inspector will look at his numbers and say, how many can I get to the 300,000 a year? Oh, I get a bit more. Tick box, thank you very much. And my concern and my question to you is, do you not think that by approving Graiseley that actually you do a disservice to the borough because you actually open the door to extra housing in all of your wards because the government want to build houses, and there is nothing in the last 5 years that I've seen that really protects this council or the residents from excessive housing anywhere. How are you going to protect us given that you haven't managed to do it in the last 5 years?
I think there's a lot there. If you look at the draft plan, there's a specific note around what we need to do for Shinfield, 3 Mile Cross and Spencer's Wood, around a buffer zone to no development. I think the big point will be at Graiseley is how that development is managed. I don't think it can be conventionally managed how other sites have been managed. I know we've got good and bad examples. I would say Arborfield is a great example. I would say some of our other SDLs are not, because as you know, you only need a big landowner to go to, or a parish council working against the previous local plan, and it can go against you, which you know better than me what has happened, and that's why we've got the problems in Cutbush Lane. I think having Graiseley and taking it down the route of a council-led or a development-led approach may help us in making sure that we don't have these dips. And there is people in the room tonight that know in the past, the 5-year land supplied has been our Achilles heel. That's now moving away. It's no longer, I think, our Achilles heel. It's the fact that what's recently come out in one of the inspector's reports is that if you don't have a local plan that's within the last 5 years, it's deemed that you don't have a plan. So now that's the latest argument. So by not having a plan, we are putting this borough at risk. But I do take on board, you know, I've had many conversations with you, and I do take on board all of your points. And we are going to have to fight, and that's why this council has spent the extra money of getting the best of the best to defend our unplanned development through appeal.
Chairman, my question is, and I think, Wayne, you've partly answered maybe a follow-on. You are proposing some 15,000 houses in Graiseley to meet the required housing numbers. This should, as you have said, provide for the excessive housing imposed on us, on this region by central government for quite a few years to come. However, as a borough, and I think this is what you were talking about earlier, we have seen large sites allocated in the last plan being slow at delivery. So how will you ensure that such a large site as Graiseley, with the huge infrastructure required, does not present the same problems? And if I could just actually remind you that in March, the government said it was open to views to require councils to ensure that at least 1/5 of housing supply pipeline should involve sites of under half a hectare. So my question is, should you split into smaller packages Graiseley to ensure that you meet the 5-year land supply problems experienced in the past? This is not actually arguing you shouldn't do Graiseley. I'm sure there's enough people to do that. But I'm suggesting split it, because you've seen South Wokingham has totally stalled, North Wokingham they can't sell the houses, and you're still being hammered at appeal because you haven't made the 5-year land supply. So split that site. Do not let one landowner get 3,000 houses on it, because they won't build it. You will not have a 5-year land supply. You know that. That's facts based on a history. So my question is, will you split it into manageable chunks in line with what the government wants to see?
You've given David poetic license here. That's about another 6 questions.
No, it's only one question, because I was corrected by an esteemed colleague of yours in the Officer Brigade.
I'll let you have. Considering.
If you give an Irishman a platform, he'll use it.
Yeah. We, together with West Berkshire Council and Reading Borough Council, have submitted a bid to the Housing Infrastructure Fund to help accelerate delivery of the recommended Graiseley Garden Market allocation. The joint bid is key to the comprehensive approach on governance, design, planning and delivery. In order to specifically address the risk of deliverability, as you were referring to, we are considering whether a delivery model such as a locally led New Town Development Corporation would be a good fit for Graiseley Garden Town proposal. A development corporation is a delivery model and potentially puts the control of development and speed of delivery in the hands of the council through enhanced land assembly, investment, development and planning powers. It is a model that can adopt and adapt more easily to ensure the continuous supply of new housing. A successful outcome of the joint bid will enable the provision of upfront infrastructure, one of the principal messages we've had from residents, and remove one of the key early costs of delivery from the development industry. The upfront provision of primary infrastructure will open the entire site, maximising the delivery area and enabling accelerated development. As you say, we would expect delivery to be could be through smaller packages of land, all confirming to the overall strategic vision and supporting the master planning. One of these packages could be the council-owned land. Separate to the recommended consultation, we are continuing to have dialogue with government through the Garden Settlement Programme and the HIF bid, with a view to securing freedoms and flexibilities in the recognition of the housing delivery and its proposals at Graiseley.
I don't really have a supplementary, but I would urge you, please, that the government is giving you a green light. It doesn't matter what the landowner says. You can impose smaller development sites to ensure you meet that 5-year land. If you don't, with absolute certainty, you'll fall into the same elephant trap that we've done with South Wokingham and with North Wokingham and the others. So please look at it very seriously. It is the answer to the problems that we will otherwise experience. Thank you very much.
What will be the benefit of the proposed Graiseley development of 15,000 houses to the current and future residents of Shinfield South?
Okay, well, as you know, it's 15,000 across West Berks, Reading, and Wokingham. Do you want to just press your? Otherwise, you get feedback.
What do you want me to do?
No, just press it off.
Turn it off.
Press it off.
Yeah. The recommended creation of Graiseley Town, Graiseley Garden Town, offers the opportunity to create a self-contained, infrastructure-rich new community, limiting the need to travel by car for everyday journeys, with rail links to Reading and Basingstoke, and a dedicated public transport routes into Reading, providing a viable alternative to the car. This meets our climate change emergency agenda and is consistent with the direction of our wellbeing strategy. A successful outcome of the bid to the Housing Infrastructure Fund will enable the upfront delivery of a wide range of infrastructure projects, including measures to design to mitigate the traffic issues and effects. The delivery of the Garden Town at Graiseley supplements our current strategic developments, reducing or eliminating the need for the large-scale development or on the edge of other towns and villages, including those in the Shinfield parish, allowing the new and expanded communities to fully form and mature. It will also provide, as I mentioned earlier, the 5,000 affordable homes to support those who cannot access suitable housing elsewhere. Due to the proximity of Graiseley to the current strategic development in Shinfield parish, the recommended approach expressively seeks to protect the area from larger, further development in this area. Furthermore, residents of Shinfield should benefit from the transport infrastructure and the community facilities as part of the large-scale Graiseley development. Will also provide improved access via pedestrian, cycle and bus links across the A33. These facilities will include a new railway station, at least one new secondary school, a health hub, indoor and outdoor leisure facilities, community buildings, public parks and children play areas.
Do you have a supplementary, Jackie?
Yes, thank you. How much infrastructure spending will take place outside the boundary of the proposed Graiseley development to alleviate the additional traffic impact of the Graiseley development on the residents of Shinfield South?
At this moment in time, the proposed infrastructure early, or rich as you refer to it, is around 252 million. There is a further 600 million that will come from seal receipts for the whole of that area, and there will obviously need to be master planning and work through to the links. I mean, I've spoke to you very high level about links across the A33, links into green parks, etc., etc. There will need to be a lot of traffic modelling. I fully understand the issues on the A33, and I fully understand the issues of Shinfield. And that's all the area that we're going to have to make sure that it improves lives for those people.
Hello, my name's Jonathan Pollock. I'm speaking on behalf of Laura for this evening. My question is, this local plan update proposal is based on large development sites. The experience with all of the current strategic development locations since 2010 is that the houses are delivered late. Does this plan therefore imply that many of the 300 rejected sites will be approved by the planning inspectorate to compensate for the delays in delivering houses identified in the local plan update?
Evening. I believe the recommended strategy is the right one. Our 4 existing strategic development locations will continue to make a significant contribution to meeting the housing needs in the new plan. The vast majority of the proposed housing on the SDLs are under construction and have planning permission. Through consultations, respondents will have clear preferences for development that needs to meet through large-scale developments where infrastructure can be planned, funded and provided alongside. That is why the recommended strategy proposes the creation of a garden town at Graiseley. We have greater choice over potential delivery models for the Graiseley Garden Town proposal than compared to what we do for the existing SDLs. For example, we are considering, I mentioned this earlier, whether a delivery model such as a locally led Newtown Development Corporation would be a good fit for Graiseley Garden Town proposal. A development corporation is a delivery model that potentially puts control of the development and speed in the hands of the councils through enhanced land assembly, investment, development and planning powers. It is a model that can adapt more easily and ensure continuous supply of new housing. We, together with West Berks and Reading Borough Councils, have submitted a bid to the Housing Infrastructure Fund to help unlock and accelerate the delivery of the recommended Graiseley Town allocation. The joint bid will help us increase the volume and rate of house building through an early investment in primary infrastructure, opening up the site and unlocking suitable development. The other proposed allocations are a mix of size and types of sites that are spread across the whole borough.
Thank you. Martin.
Good evening.
Good evening.
Does this council believe in transparency, democracy and accountability? I was dismayed to read about the recommendations as set out in this report on page 5. Recommendations 3 and 4, if implemented as written, set out that this executive will only agree that minor changes will be taken forward into the final local plan following this consultation. The recommendations also set out that the decision on these minor changes, minor is not defined, will be a delegated decision. This means that any amendments will not be brought back before the executive for further scrutiny. Therefore, how can this consultation be meaningful? And will the public not simply conclude that this exercise is a total charade? Furthermore, how can any future amendments made to this plan have democratic legitimacy when they are signed off behind closed doors?
Thank you very much. Unfortunately, I think, Martin, you've misunderstood the recommendations, and I can assure you that decisions on the local plan will be transparent. The delegation of minor changes to the Director of Locality and Customer Services in consultation with the lead member of planning is standard practice in preparing for a consultation. And we are talking about a consultation, not a plan. The delegation solely relates to the documentation for the consultation. It does not relate to or impact on future decisions of the Council or the Executive. Following this consultation, we will need to reflect whether the changes are required. It will be for the future meetings of the Executive and Council to consider these and approve the plan to be consulted on at the next stage. The local development scheme is simply the document that sets out the programme for reviewing the local plan. We are required to produce this and keep it up to date so people are able to understand when consultations are likely to occur. Do you have a supplementary, Martin?
Yes, I do. If, following the consultation, support emerges for some additional new housing, for example, affordable housing, to be built on Greenbelt, would this council consider amending the current planning conditions as contained in the local plan draft?
The purpose of a consultation is to hear the views of the people that you're consulting. And yes.
Thanks very much.
The report states, and I quote, analysis of the housing market clearly shows a number of failings with the way the government has calculated the minimum number of homes in the council for the plan. A case will be advanced to demonstrate exceptional circumstances exist to deviate from the normal application of this government planning policy, reducing the requirement to 762.2 dwellings per annum. We will review and adjust the figure downward if the circumstances permit. Why then, since 2013, every time the housing number was increased, the council never challenged them and just accepted them, along with the implications it has for housing numbers and the 5-year housing land supply?
Evening, Gary. Since 2013, the Council has been tenacious and doggedly thought a fairer housing number. All leaders of this council have taken the challenge to government, Secretary of States, ministers, through our MPs and directly. To support our position, we have directly engaged with residents to demonstrate the strength of feeling and welcome the support we've received from all members, town and parish councils in their efforts. The fight must go on and will continue. The answer to why we're putting forward a case for exceptional circumstances now is simply that the time is right. A case for exceptional circumstances to deviate from the government policy can only be made through the local plan itself. This has been confirmed by one of the top planning barristers. The recommended draft plan consultation is the first opportunity for us to put forward our case. Until now, we've had estimated numbers based on the government's policy and guidance. The outcome of the previous studies and the current standard method simply reflects this. The element of discretion we have within government planning policy is limited, and any argument we made will no doubt be challenged by the development industry. Ultimately, a government planning inspector will decide whether the case will be accepted or not.
Anyway, well, best of luck with that. I would more than happy to support you on that. My question did talk about numbers, but linked to numbers is actual locations. And when Graiseley was first raised about 4 years ago, it became public 4 years ago, and I think there's a reference to EM5. EM6 is the question linked to that. The Conservative leader of the council then, Keith Baker, stated on the 16th of December that if the council's bid for 250 million is successful, along with 5.38 million for technical studies, and the plans for Graiseley's are approved, then another 5 million will be raised via CIL, and you mentioned 600 million a second ago. Nearly 3 years later, on the 26th of March in 2019, the then Conservative leader, Julian Magee-Sumner, admitted he was surprised at just having made a statement on housing, enough is enough, to hear that the government had given them £750,000 to fast-track the proposals which his party supported. He added that they had given us money to work out whether it was feasible or not, and he added it wasn't feasible before. Now, this would suggest that 600 million CIL alone, without the extra 255.38 million to unlock Graiseley's potential, would make Graiseley not suitable and become a non-starter. It begs the question that if Graiseley has always been the... Yes, I'm just asking the question this second. The question is, as Graiseley has always been the Conservatives' intention to develop for well over 4 years, whether they get the requested 255.38 million or not is in the new local plan consultation. Is it worth the paper it's written on? That's a question.
I think it's a rhetoric question. Thank you.
Evening, Rochelle. In order to specifically address the risk of slowdown or recession, we are considering, and I'm going to go into it again, such delivery models like a locally new town development corporation, which would fit the garden proposal. As I've said earlier, the development corporation is a model that offers potential to put control and speed in the hands of the council and enhances it through land supply and I've said this previously, so you heard me twice already. Other factors and actions also reduce the risk. We currently have a healthy bank of land with planning permissions for homes as a result of our existing core strategy and part of our local plan. We know these permissions will continue to deliver over the coming years. A successful outcome of the bid to the Housing Infrastructure Fund will accelerate delivery of the Garden Town at Graiseley by supporting the upfront infrastructure, removing the key costs and opening up the site early. The recommended strategy also includes a range and size of other types of sites and reasonable flexibility in supply, all helping to maintain a healthy supply across the borough. As an organisation, we can also use our ownership of land to influence other developments that come along.
In the past, we have been forced to build more houses. We've been forced to have a larger quota because we weren't delivering the number of houses we were supposed to deliver during that time. And if they're not selling them, like's happening in North Wokingham, like's happening in Hatch Farm, like's happening all over the borough, what are we going to do? Because at this point, Graiseley isn't going to come online for a while. You're expecting all of the houses to come from the existing SDLs, and if they're not selling them, they're not going to do that, so they're going to increase our quota. We're going to put the extra 100 houses or something like we got in the last 10.
It's a very good point, and you know we've discussed this on many occasions. Yeah. I think what you've got to look at is if Graiseley, through the consultation, gets the go-ahead, infrastructure will start very early, and you'll potentially have buildings start in 2024. And so you've got a gap. You're absolutely right. We've got a gap between now and 2024 to ensure that these other areas that are delivering. And that's why our own housing, you know, as John can support me on, our own housing corporation companies can actually help deliver those and step in on areas where we can either develop with the developer or do a joint JV, so a joint relationship where we can accelerate the housing. The good thing about Graiseley, and I know this won't be, you know, everybody won't sing from the same hymn sheet, is 5,000 plus of those houses will be affordable. And if we go down the route of a housing corporation, we are in control, not the developers. The problem we've got with our SDLs at the moment, apart from, I would say, and John knows far more about Arborfield than I do, is Arborfield seems to be working because they've got this commitment to the MOD, whereas other sites, as you quite rightly say, the developers will sell when it's right for them to sell. And that's why we've got to look at other models for Graiseley, to try and even out that ups and downs. You know, but you also must look at Wokingham as an area. I know there's these statements out there that some are selling, some are not selling. You know, they're selling far better in Wokingham than they are across the whole of the rest of the country if you just look at the sales. You know, I mean, last year we did 1250. The year before we did 1565. The reason why this housing is coming late because the SDL approach was back-ended. It was never designed to deliver in the early stages. It was like the old hockey stick of setting up a new business, and they will develop and grow as we go along. But you're right. The next few years, we've got to make sure they continue to deliver, because if Graiseley does go ahead, we've got to bridge that gap.
I would just add before you that the current plan is a plan from 2019 to 2036. Of the 13,000 houses presumed there, only 3,000 are due to come from Graiseley. The other 10,000 are from other sites or from majoritively a hangover of the current core strategy. So the current plan that we're looking at in consultation is not talking about 10,000 or 15,000 houses from Graiseley. It's talking about 3 alone. Thank you.
Thank you very much, and good evening, members. Under Policy H2, sites allocated for residential use mixed use on page 80 of the local plan update, it indicates that Winnersh Farm, Winnersh, will be allocated 250 dwellings. Up until now, the Winnersh Borough Councillors have been informed that Winnersh would only have a couple of small sites allocated. Why have these 250 dwellings suddenly been added to this schedule?
Evening, Paul. Firstly, I'd like to clarify that there has never been a position where Winnersh Parish Council will only accommodate a couple of small sites. However, the land at Winnersh Farm presents an opportunity to provide a well-designed development, with part of the land being owned by the council, and it builds up the point I mentioned to Rachel just a moment about having more flexibility in owning our own land and therefore controlling development. This site is an opportunity to deliver the increased numbers of affordable homes to support those who cannot access suitable housing elsewhere in the borough.
Okay. As this was a material change to the original consultation by combining a number of sites together forming one, due process should have been followed. Therefore, why weren't the ward borough councillors and Winnersh Parish Council consulted prior to the meeting of the Planning and Transport Policy Member Working Group, so that their views could have been put forward to the member working group so they were properly informed? The ward borough councillors and Winnersh Parish Council are against this new site. My question is, and it was in there, why weren't the ward borough councillors and Winnersh Parish Council consulted prior to the meeting of the Planning and Transport Policy Member Working Group?
There's probably, well, there's two answers to that. The agenda goes out before, so the cross-party can discuss it with their various members of the ward members. So if there is somebody there that wants to discuss the site, so they could have done that. Equally, at that meeting, they could have put forward an objection or asked for further information or asked for, well, it could be a whole range of things they could have asked for at that various meetings where all site allocations were discussed. I was at that meeting, and members of your party were also at that meeting.
Good evening. Obviously, there's a lot of people here quite unhappy about the numbers of houses, but really my question is around the nature of the houses. So for the, my actual question is, for the Woking Borough Council carbon neutral objective, what specific standards, e.g. triple glazing, renewable energy, and the removal of gas boilers and appliances are going to be mandated to the builders?
Well, thank you for your question, Adrian. One of our key priorities in creating this local plan was to seek to achieve net carbon neutral emissions from new homes built in the major residential and commercial developments across the borough. The local plan update is in the process of being developed, so there is an opportunity to implement sustainable planning policies. To this end, developments will embrace innovative, sustainable design solutions for energy efficiency and renewable energy generation, and will enable the use of walking, cycling and public transport through ensuring that these options are central to the design and layout of the new development. The government is also proposing changes to building regulations that would increase the energy efficiency requirement for new homes from 2020, so this year. This is seen as a stepping stone to the introduction of the Future Home Standard from 2025. The intention is to make new homes more energy efficient so that they may produce 75 to 80% less CO2 emissions than one built to current requirements. Energy efficiency will be achieved through the introduction of more efficient boilers, wastewater heat recovery, and improvement to ventilation and air tightness standards, improvement in fabric efficiency of walls, roofs, floors and windows, and, as you said, triple glazing. The Council also plans to encourage the owners of existing homes to retrofit and improve their own homes so that they can become as energy efficient as is possible.
Yes, where will this information be documented?
Many of the plans will be put forward as part of the local plan. Some will go as part of our borough design guide and some will be included as part of the carbon emergency action plan going forward.
Thank you very much, John. My question is, as you know, Graiseley was kept secret by senior Conservative councillors in 2016. With hindsight, do you think this was the right thing to have done?
I wasn't a senior Conservative councillor at the time. But I believe that the original proposals for Graiseley, when there was a Liberal administration here, which goes back some 20 years, which you probably also don't remember. So I believe and I understand that a confidential expression of interest to the locally led garden villages town and city's perspective was made by West Berks, Reading and Wokingham councils in 2016, following the encouragement of the government. I understand that the EOI allowed the borough to outline a case for upfront funding of infrastructure and discuss planning freedoms which could help us address the problem of appeals for speculative developments, with a submission allowing us to keep the lines open, which are currently being exploited. The submission was made, I understand, with the full understanding that the concept was at formative stage and that no council was committed to the proposal. Given this position, all of the councils agreed the submission should remain confidential until such time as we were able to assess other possible planning strategies and engage with residents. I believe that not submitting an EOI would have potentially passed up an opportunity for significant investment funding, one of the key messages we hear from residents. Do you have a supplementary?
Yes, I do. Just to correct part of your question there were quite a number of councils who... I
wasn't answering a question. I was answering your question. I was asking a question of you.
Okay, I won't correct your question. I'll do that separately. So my supplementary is you appear to be acting in the belief that Graiseley will protect the rest of the borough from development. I don't agree with this and believe that there will be many, many planning appeals that could cost the council taxpayers of Wokingham Borough Council many thousands of pounds and perhaps many millions of pounds. Why are you so confident that Graiseley protects the rest of the borough from development?
First of all, we're currently in the situation where we're spending a lot of money on appeals. We've engaged the leading barristers in the UK to defend the borough's position. Wokingham Borough is unfortunate in that it is surrounded by protected land, and it is a very desirable place for putting houses, and people want to live here. So we are a prime opportunity for developers to attack. And that's why we've strengthened our defences. And we are winning appeals. And I suggest that that is the right thing to do. I'm not confident that we can do anything because we're a local authority. And we have certain powers, we have certain guidelines which are given by central government to us. But the approach that we've taken is the strongest approach that we can possibly take to strengthen the position of the borough. And that's all I can really say. There are no guarantees because we are at the behest of government. And almost all parties seem to agree uniformly and without reservation that the country needs more homes. And the calculation of the homes they believe that we need are 300,000, and that filters down to a number for us. And we have to find a provision for that. If we do not do that, we will find ourselves in the same sort of problems that your colleagues in South Oxfordshire are finding themselves in, where central government will take over our planning department. So I think that what we're proposing is the only route which protects our position. I answer that, Clive, but that's a supplementary to supplementary. I said I think that it's the best protection that we can provide. But we're all open to ideas, and this is a consultation. So if you believe that there's some other way to provide that protection, then please address it in the consultation. But be mindful of what's happening in South Oxfordshire, what's happening in Buckinghamshire, and what's happening in Bracknell Forest.
Good evening. My question is, has the Council come to a formal signed agreement with the central government on the 252 million housing infrastructure bid?
Evening, Barry. The simple answer is no. We have no formal agreement in place. The bid is currently under consideration and following the due diligence process as part of the bid. We do hope for an announcement early this year. Feedback to date would indicate that Graiseley Garden Town proposal is an exciting proposition with sufficiently strong appeal for ministers to be willing to announce government support. In fact, the HIF bid submission included a letter of support from Theresa May, at the time Prime Minister, identifying as the best option for growth in Wokingham Borough. It is also worth noting that in March 2019, the government, in a demonstration of its support for our proposal, designated Graiseley and the Garden Town status under its Garden Communities Prospectus. This included £750,000 in capacity funding to support the delivery of the Graiseley Garden Town. It is expected that will become an annual tranche of capacity funding to help us in our bid.
Without the housing infrastructure funding, is the Graiseley development viable?
Our plan is based upon having that infrastructure funding.
So does that mean it could be non-viable?
Our plan is based upon having the infrastructure funding.
Better put my glasses on. In the new local plan, it states that Wokingham will require affordable houses to be provided in all new developments of 5 or more houses of about 20 to 40%, depending on the site. This departure from Conservative government policy, which only requires affordable housing on developments of 10 or more. What reasons do you have for believing that Wokingham will be allowed to insist on a more generous policy that is currently allowed by the government?
Evening. Access to affordable, high-quality housing is a challenge for people living in Wokingham Borough, and in particular the young. Given that they are more likely to be on lower incomes, less able to secure mortgages, finance or access to the private sector in the rental side. High house prices and rents mean that there is a high need for affordable housing, and it is a priority for this council to increase the numbers of affordable homes, as I've mentioned earlier on the 5,000 at Graiseley, etc. The proposed approach in the drafter plan is to continue what has already been applied successfully through the adopted core strategy local plan in the borough. This requires developments of 5 or more dwellings to make proportionate contributions towards affordable housing. Whilst this deviates from the government's planning policy, I believe there is a clear need for affordable housing in the borough, and it is sufficient justification to be more ambitious. Deviating from the government policy has been achieved elsewhere, including Reading Borough Council, if you've seen their recent local plan. We know from applying our current policy that the approach is achievable.
Yeah. Here we go again. How many additional affordable homes do you expect to be delivered through this policy compared to the numbers that you've delivered under current government policy? Thank you.
I don't have the actual numbers. I'm looking at John, but am I giving you a hospital pass? I don't have them, but I will get them to you. Is that all right? Thank you.
Thank you ever so much, everybody, and thank you for being so patient. That's the end of the questions. So going on to the executive meeting, I'd just like to emphasise a few things which have come up on the questions. Anthony, could you get out or stay in? Whatever you're going to do. Okay, everybody gone who wants to go? I'd just like to, before we start the conversation, pick up a couple of points which have been raised in the questions. One is that what it is that we're considering, and actually we're considering going out to a plan consultation. We're not approving a plan. So anybody who in the borough who wishes to object to the consultation, then that's the appropriate means for doing so. And when people are talking about form and due process, this is the due process. And certainly those who come from local government should know that this is the due process, which is a consultation. So assuming that a consultation is actually a plan is erroneous, and there's a lot of steps which we need to go down before this draft plan becomes a plan, one of which is signing up with the government for the HIF bid. The other one is we're still seeking protections on the planning policies, and the sort of timescale we're looking at that is this consultation is a couple of months or whatever it is, possibly assessing what it is that is comes out of the consultation, and then it has to go to council or another consultation if it's materially different. So lots of steps, and then after council, if council approves it, it then has to go to an inspection in public, which is another part of the process. So the assumption that this is the local plan is erroneous. It is currently what it is, which is a draft plan consultation. And that's all it is.
Thank you, Chair.
It is in Charlotte's ward.
Thank you. For those that don't already know, I represent Shinfield South. I've been hugely disappointed by the local plan update, obviously, because it is recommending a new town in Graiseley. I accept that this is obviously the draft local plan update. But this follows on from the tremendous and unprecedented response from our residents to the Enough is Enough campaign, where residents told us that they were strongly against the central government's housing targets being imposed upon us, and also against more development in the borough along the lines of the proposals set out in the local plan update, such as these. From a ward perspective, representing Shinfield South, the ward in which the new town is proposed, it feels like a total kick in the teeth for the residents who've already suffered mass development from the last local plan update in 2010, changing the nature and the character of 3 Mile Cross, Shinfield, Ryesh Green and Spencer's Wood. Fundamentally, a new town can never be a self-contained town, as promised in page 23 of the local plan draft. I would love to find a town that is totally self-contained, because I've never ever seen one in all my travels wherever I've been. Today we've been asked to agree to consult on the draft plan and supporting documents as set out in the appendix, and I'm afraid that I will not be able to support these recommendations tonight as set out for a number of reasons. I feel very sad that I'm not able to support the executive tonight, and it's, I think, the first time in the whole history of the 10 years that I've served here that I have not been able to do this. But I feel that we're paying lip service to our residents and our stakeholders, and I do not believe that their responses will be taken seriously. Let me go on for more detail. This local plan update is based on the assumption that the council will be successful in winning the Housing Infrastructure Bid Funds, the HIF, unlocking a £252 million infrastructure fund to forward fund the projects which are for the infrastructure to make Graiseley sustainable. If successful, these funds will be time limited. And can anyone guarantee that these millions could be spent potentially in a very short time frame, possibly just 2 or 3 years? I don't know anyone that can spend that amount of money in 2 or 3 years to unlock a whole town development. It also assumes that central government may give us a moratorium on development numbers for the rest of the borough, stopping speculative sites coming forward. Thus far, we have no guarantees on either the £252 million or a moratorium on housing numbers. We could end up with a new town the size of Wokingham in a totally unsustainable location and hundreds of speculative applications elsewhere, making this a totally unsuccessful plan. I'm strongly opposed to a local plan update that supports a new town and dismisses many other viable and very sustainable, sensible developments in other parts of the borough. This is because I do not think that developers will sit by totally idle for the next 15 years without any income from their option sites, and that they will put no applications in. And I simply believe that we will lose more and more appeals time and time again, as we have done since 2010, throwing millions and millions of council taxpayers at a lost cause. Also, by including in a local plan update more strategic development sites in other locations, in some small location sites, the risk of lagging behind in our housing delivery target numbers we will also mean that we won't be fighting appeals. By including some other sites, we won't be fighting the appeals that we have done, such as the ones that we're doing more recently in places like Shinfield, Fitchampstead, by some of the worst developers that come in across the whole of the country, and I won't go to name some of those, so I get myself in trouble, more trouble. Many councillors on the executive will not have been on the council when Graiseley was proposed before as a development site, which was over 20 years ago, 23 years I think ago, but for a much smaller number of houses, not a whole new town. It fell, and it failed totally at the examination in public, and I believe that for many of the reasons, the same reasons again, this may be the fate in store for these proposals. Briefly, the reasons why this site is not sustainable for a new town are as follows. You just have to go there today to realise that it's totally underwater. The roads are already at full capacity. The A33 backs down all the way back 3 or 4 miles in the morning, in both directions. Junction 11 onto the M4 is totally full to capacity. You can't even get around the roundabout. Residents in Mortimer will not stand by, despite the fact that it's in West Berkshire, and watch their railway station being shut down, which serves not just Mortimer town, but also the many rural farms in the surrounding area. The types of houses that are needed to make this development sustainable, if indeed it will ever be sustainable, are high-rise blocks, skyscrapers, not the type of development that is suitable for a location like this. The constraints on the site are also tremendous imposed by AWE, the atomic weapons site. The assumptions that everyone will take public transport just can't be backed up because there's no other site in this area that can make those assumptions make sense. We have the highest car ownership in the whole of the UK, and I don't understand how we can make assumptions that everybody will take a bus, the bicycle, or the train. And there's a total lack of capacity in all our resources in the health services all around. And I bear witness to that because when I gave birth to my daughter, at first when I arrived at the hospital, I was told, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to take to your car and go somewhere else. There is a lack of total capacity for maternity at the Royal Berkshire. Lastly, let me get on to the most important facts. I want to talk about our residents in our borough in Graiseley in particular and focus on the community there. It's a very rural community with small businesses, farms, a small number of social housing, GRT sites, mobile homes, sites for older residents in mobile homes, and many of them living on very low incomes, and families also caring for our children in care. This is not an affluent area of the borough, and it is incumbent on us, therefore, to be cognizant that residents there may not be so engaged in matters of this council as in other areas of the borough, and we have to reach out to them through this consultation to hear their voices. They are not the kind of people that will naturally come to these kind of meetings and be engaged. I was disappointed by the Equalities Impact Assessment. I didn't feel that it got to the heart of such matters and showed a naivety about the communities affected by this consultation and the proposals set out in the draft. One such point saying that for pregnancy and maternity, we would have a positive impact score. I find this utterly bizarre. As I've said before, the Royal Berkshire simply doesn't have capacity. I want to urge members on the executive tonight to search their hearts and think long and hard about these recommendations and proposals in the local plan update. Furthermore, about the next 30 or 40 years of history that they will define, which will have such ramifications for communities such as Graiseley.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Charlotte. I think we've got to get real about the local plan and local plan update. If we don't have a local plan which passes muster and achieves the sort of numbers that are a minimum which the government expect, we will have unplanned development. We have a load of appeals at the moment, and those appeals will cascade to a flood if we do not do something fairly quickly. And as Charlotte says quite correctly, other developers who would be unhappy with this local plan will pile in very shortly, and they will start appealing for their sites. We are ready for that onslaught. The misfortune is that our armour is only what it is. We can't invent ways of turning it away, and I refer you to the authorities who've tried to turn it away, which are now in special measures from government. So, given that the country as a whole accepts that there is a need for housing, then we have to work within the rules that we've got. This local plan update is a consultation, and it does foresee 13,000 houses, which is 750, which is a year, which is considerably less than the 1,200 we were looking at in 18 months ago. And of those 13,000 houses, 3,000 are Graiseley. The rest is either the surfeit of the SDLs or new small sites. So it's it is packed with new small sites. The choice of Graiseley is a discussion which has been going on, as I said, to Clive for 20 years. So to try and suggest that it's been invented in the last 2 or 3, 4 years, or even through secret discussions of people, is just fallacious. It is nonsense. It is spinning something which even Clive can't spin. We have only one site which the government is prepared to go with infrastructure-led delivery. All the other sites we will have to find, and if we lose the sites by appeal, we will have no infrastructure. So we as an authority are faced with having to do a local plan. We only have really one local plan which we can do, and if we don't do that, we will lose control of the process. The enough is enough consultation was never a moratorium. A moratorium was never realistic, because even if we didn't approve another house for the next 10 years, we'd still have a hangover from the current core strategy of some 7,000 houses. So a complete moratorium is not possible. I appreciate that any countryside, and it breaks my heart to have any countryside sacrificed to development. I've been a tree hugger all my life, and I would probably continue to be so when I'm under the ground. But there's an imperative which is which has been driven by a perceived need for more homes, and we can't get away from that. And if we were to have a moratorium, I would guess we would have a similar size or even greater group of people protesting that we're not building any houses. So we have to do a local plan. We have to do a local plan because the alternative is planning by appeal. Planning by appeal is no infrastructure. Having a local plan is infrastructure. Doing what we're doing is infrastructure-led, funded by the government. Last point, really. I appreciate that Graiseley at the moment is underwater, but so is Remenham, and my house is a lake at the moment. So almost all the borough is underwater at the moment, so it's not unusual. Do you want to add anything in response?
I think, just to build on the point that if we get the infrastructure fund, 3,000 houses is the number that we've got between now and 2036, not 15,000. If we set up a corporation, we are in control. And it's important that if we do go down that route, we have the correct stewardship to make sure that gets delivered, and we can deliver in that. When we can deliver early, we can deliver the affordable homes early. So there are 3 elements to this. That's part 1. Part 2 is the smaller packages that we've put forward as proposals across 10 town and parishes, and also then ensuring that the other sites still deliver in our existing core strategy. And is there a plan B? Somebody asked that earlier. Well, you could take the 300 sites, and you could take all of those 300 sites and you could downsize them all to achieve your number. So what then do you have? You have development across the whole borough. How are you then going to deal with that through any form of infrastructure? You then have payments, as we do now, through the seal arrangement, whereby they're pay-as-you-go. This council would have to borrow millions and millions and millions of pounds to support that kind of approach. Whereas this approach delivers 252 million, which is the equivalent, based on current seal receipts right now, of 6,500 homes. So you're almost getting 6,500 homes free, on top of the seal receipts that we will get out of Graiseley, that will be to the tune of around 600 million. We don't have many alternatives. And the other thing I would say, having been in this job in the executive position, not as a deputy position, I've sat in a lot of appeals over the last 9 months. And you really need to go and sit in these appeals if you're actual councillors or parish councillors, and see what these very well-assisted QCs are saying. As I said earlier, the 5-year land supply now has disappeared, but it will come back. It will come back. David knows that when he was doing the job that I'm doing now. He knew that we dipped out of that 5-year land supply, and developers are there waiting for you to dip out so that they can dip in. We are now in a situation where our local plan is out of date. And you might be sitting there thinking, well, you're not going to get a local plan tomorrow, the week after. No, that doesn't matter. The fact that we've started the process formally helps us in our team. And we've got a very good team in working. And I would urge you not to listen to the rhetoric. Come into the chambers, because we've got a lot coming up. We've got 3 coming up over the next 10 weeks, big appeals, 2 of which are in Finchampstead. 1 is in Cutbush Lane in Shinfield. Come and listen to what these QCs are saying. Come and listen to our staff. We are not giving our staff the right tools if we don't put forward and move ahead with this consultation.
Thank you, Chairman. I find this incredibly frustrating. I fundamentally believe the housing targets are too high. I think that the actual problem in this country is there's too much growth in the southeast and not enough across the country. We should be trying to build the economies in the rest of the country rather than overheating the southeast. Our residents have suffered from too much development too fast without sufficient infrastructure over the last few years. It's caused traffic jams, it's caused lack of facilities, it's caused all sorts of things. And I reluctantly conclude that this is the only way of trying to solve this. I hope I'm right, but I'm very, very frustrated by the fact we're being pushed into a corner with housing numbers that I fundamentally believe are completely incorrect.
I think we all agree with you, Pauline. I'll be the first to agree with you. But you know, we didn't take a decision where we would go into Wokingham and see the local QC, land QC, that would talk to us about development. We went to see, not by my recommendation, by planning guidance. We went to see, myself and John, along with the experienced officers in the council, went to see the best QC in the country for guidance. We took that information, we then went further. John, myself, any minister would listen, and the QC's advice to us is it's a very dangerous road to go down to try and fight government, because you're kicking the can down the road and you could end up in a 10 times worse situation than you are in now. And if you want advice in life, you go to the best. And if the best tells you that and you ignore it at your peril. But I do agree with all the points you make.
This is a bit of deja vu for me. I live in Arborfield, and with my fellow councillor, who I'm a Barkham member, but with my fellow Arborfield, we fought very hard to make sure we got all the infrastructure. We got the relief road, we got a brand new school, which we would never have got if we didn't take the 3,500 houses in Arborfield. And I'd like to say that because we worked so hard at avoiding additional homes, we've stuck with 3,500, even though we've got the infrastructure. To sit here and listen to anybody to say that there are more suitable places around the borough to build housings rather than a new town, I'm just amazed. Maybe I don't live in the same borough as everybody else, but if there's anybody in this room who feels that there are more suitable places to build houses in this borough other than a new town, it's just unfortunate that the new town is Graiseley. Now, my concern Wayne, with Graiseley, is it gets the correct infrastructure. It gets the infrastructure delivered. I have a friend who built 2 houses in Jamaica. He had to put the roads in first. He had to put the street lights in first. We built 50 metres of road, and we built 50 metres of houses and built 50 metres of road. We cannot do that. We are seeing the example that around the place where people build homes and they just don't put in the infrastructure. So my concern is that the HIF bid must come forward. It must be there to kickstart the whole thing. And I'd like to think not only do we solve the problems of a new town, but we also solve some of the existing problems. Our infrastructure, our services, our schools are under huge pressure. And for anybody to say that we can take any more houses in this borough other than in a new town, I just don't believe.
I agree, John. I mean, that's why the 3,000 number for Graiseley is not a number that's going to come forward early. I think it will be the first time in our history that we've delivered anything that has the infrastructure in first.
I would just say one thing. I agree with Pauline on the housing numbers, but I can tell you I've held the position that Wayne's held. I've spoken to the ministers. The average time that a housing minister stays in post is 9 months. So by the time you've explained everything to them, they've moved on. Okay, and it's not just the Conservatives. The whole of the political spectrum believes that housing is the engine that drives the economy. I don't necessarily think that's the case. As a local authority, we should be able to make our own decisions. We've got relatively low homelessness in this borough. Our housing list is tiny compared with some other places. But we cannot make the decision on what our housing numbers should be. They're enforced on us, and I think that's wrong.